So let's get stuck into the presentation. Thanks everyone for coming. Happy New Year. And we're going to run for approximately 45 minutes with some questions and answers at the end. Focusing on today ISO 9001, ISO 14001, and we'll just touch on the new safety standard a little bit as well. Okay, so a little bit about Compass. What do we do? It's the only slide on this, and we'll get stuck into the material. So we certify to each of the standards, and looking at the list of attendees today, there's a number of you that have been involved in that side of our business. Recently, we've got involved and have purchased an RTO business that is involved in delivering auditing training and training around the standards. So that's an exciting development for Compass. We're an Australian business, and I'm very excited to be here. Okay, well that's a little bit about Compass. We thought in terms of preparing, might be useful to look at who is ISO, who's JASANS, Standards Australia, where does everyone fit in? So you have ISO.org, ISO, Standards Australia, you've probably heard of them, are involved in developing the standards. Generally are not-for-profit organisations, and their role is to develop and publish standards for management systems, for products, all sorts of standards. The IAF is an organisation that's involved with ISO in terms of it governs the process of certification to those standards. You've then got JASANS in Australia. So JASANS is a member of the IAF. JASANS is a joint Australian-New Zealand government entity, and their role is to accredit companies like Compass and others to provide certification. And then there's people like Compass, and we certify to those standards. So these are each of the players involved in. So ISO have been working over 7 years to develop the new standards. The IAF builds rules around how they should be interpreted and the guidelines around auditing against those standards. JASANS rolls those out in this region. People like Compass, well, hopefully we help you to be certified to those standards. Okay. In terms of the new standards, we're going to, I think when you're always looking at a change or a new development, sometimes it can be useful to go backwards before you go forward. I'll spend a little bit of time on the history of the standards. We're going to look at how the standards are, the framework related to the standards, how they're structured, and then three of the key elements, the three most important changes to the standards, which is leadership, risk and risk-based thinking, good old documented information. So that's where we're going to spend most of our time. In 45 minutes, it's a case of focusing on some of the very, very key areas. Talk about the process of transitioning if you're currently certified, and allow some time for some questions and answers. Now, I can't hear you if you're talking, so the questions you'll need to type from the message box. Okay, So they're the things we're going to cover today. History. Where did it all come from? Okay, so the standards haven't been around that long. It really is a 20th century construct. And primarily in the early 20th century, it was a case of developing standards related to products. It really was about helping to facilitate international trade. So in the early, late 19th, early 20th century, some national standard organisations started to be formed. So, for example, Standards Australia was established in 1922. And it wasn't until 1947 that ISO was formed. So prior to then, it was quite difficult in terms of international trade. You may have a manufacturer of a product needing to demonstrate their product met the Australian standard, the Japanese standard, the French standard, the UK standard, which is quite costly. And so post-World War II, there was really a lot of emphasis on those national standards coming together to form a unified approach, and that's where ISO was formed. And between post-World War II and really up until the 80s, most is where ISO 9001 started its development. It wasn't published till 1987, but a lot of quality type and quality assurance processes were really starting to make some ground, particularly in post-World War redevelopment of Japan. And you had fellows like Deming involved in the rebuild of Japan and its industries. And a lot of principles related to quality assurance were being put in place. ISO 9001 started a little bit earlier than 1987 as the British Standard 5750, and was really, and even the very first version of ISO in 87 was really about processes for, in their own words, a rigorous, stable factory floor manufacturing process. We then had a new version of ISO 9000 in 1994, which really started looking at preventative action, and so the first iteration into risk, if you like, in terms of planning and starting to consider proactive ways of planning and managing to avoid bad outcomes. Our first environmental management system standard was published in 1995. And both 18001 and 4801 for safety in 1999, with the current version of 4801 being 2001. An update to ISO 9000 to 9001 in 2000. This was seen as a big change for the standards, with focusing on, instead of having a system of documents and lots of documents, to a documented system. 2008, the current version that perhaps most of you are most familiar with, really with only some minor changes in it, and to where we are today with 2015. So, what's happening in 2015? Okay. Well, one of the things that hasn't changed is all of the standards are based around the foundation of PDCA or Plan, Do, Check, Act. You'll see that in the current version of the standard and in the newer versions of the standard. Again, a construct of Deming and in post-World War Japan rebuild. And it's demonstrated in this way in each of the standards. And this is the structure of the of ISO 9001. So this diagram appears in the current version of, well, the 2015 version of 9001 and 14001, and indeed in the proposed 2016 version of the safety standard ISO 45001. Let me just go back. And you can see the Plan, Do, Check, Act there. So leadership is at the center, and we'll be talking a lot about leadership today. So you've got your internal requirements, the organization and its context. It starts introducing those risk concepts, which we'll be talking about, as an input to the system. Clearly, customer requirements are very important, and the needs and expectations of relevant interested parties. So leadership sits at the center. It's a process around planning what you do. And each of the numbers here actually reflect the part of the standard. So this is section 5 of the standard, section 6 of the standard, section 4 of the standard here. So planning, support operations, performance of value, improvement as a system here, with the outputs being customer satisfaction. The previous diagram was much more linear, with customer requirements the only input. So not considering the organization and its context or other interested parties, which might include workers, governments. A linear process here with the system really focused only on the product realization process, resulting in a product being put to the customer with some consideration around customer satisfaction and ultimately continual improvement of the quality management system. Okay. So the structure moving forward is a much more organic and systematic approach to how the business does business, rather than a system that supports a product realization process. And that's the key emphasis in this diagram, which supports the way the standards have been structured moving forward. Okay. So one of the first very big change relates to leadership. So it gets its own chapter, a whole new part of the standard that's never been published before, with some key requirements. So as we discussed, right at the center of the system. Here are the key things that relate to leadership. So top leadership become responsible for some key things. Previously, they're really responsible for resourcing the system and providing for a management representative and the policy. Today, top management and the leaders of the business have a far larger responsibility. And in fact, there's no requirement for a management representative any longer. It's all about top management and leaders of the business ensuring that the system is they're accountable for the system in general, for the policy and objectives, and for those being compatible with strategy. And I've highlighted the two key ones in red that I think will be the biggest focus. And one is that your system is integrated into the business. So no longer will the quality manual be, or the environmental manual, be a folder that sits on a shelf that holds little compatibility with what really goes on in the business. The idea is that your systems are integrated into business processes. And the second one that I've highlighted here is that top management are responsible to ensure that the system achieves its intended results. So that management review process where you start building quality objectives or environmental targets, top management will need to take responsibility in terms of ensuring that that they're resourced and that they achieve the intended results. So I think that's a wonderful change. I think for many small to medium businesses, it's probably a business as usual change and readily is written in a way that probably how you're doing things today. Perhaps for some larger organizations where you have a quality team or an environmental team that may or may not be able to access top management as readily as they would like to, or have the support of that group, there may come some challenges in terms of rolling out this aspect. But I think it really reflects the need for these systems to be integrated and part of what you do as a business. And they've really made some substantial changes to the standard to make them more contemporary and usable. And perhaps this is the payback from that. It's one thing to make them less prescriptive, but providing there's strong leadership in ensuring that the system is integrated and is working, then that may be the trade-off. So there you go. So they're the key changes that relate to leadership, and they're the key requirements. These are pretty consistent, almost identical across quality, safety, and environment. Okay, documented information. What's happening there? Well, firstly, what is documented information? I guess so this definition is from the standard itself, and effectively in the current versions where they've referred to documentation or a quality manual or documented procedures or records, they've all been replaced, and in its stead is documented information. This is a pretty big change. No mandatory documented procedures, not a single one. So this gives a lot more flexibility. The documented procedures that you have are those that you deem are useful. The 2008 version of quality makes internal audit and document control and records management, non-conforming product, corrective action, preventative action, they're all mandatory documented procedures. Well, none of them are in the 2015 version. Now, there is a requirement for documented information, but not necessarily for documented procedures. And I'll explain what that means in the next slide. It doesn't mean you have to get rid of them. If your internal audit written procedure is useful, then keep it. But if you have if these procedures are only there because you think the auditor wants to see them, then you now have an opportunity to only document those procedures that you deem are useful for the business. So what documented information is required? It's any information that needs to be controlled and or retained by an organisation. So it reflects things like procedures and clearly those that need to be retained or retention is a record. They can be in any format or media and from any source. So that means, it could be something online, something on your website. When it comes to looking at how you do document control, you might be showing us your software, your document control system. That may be the way that you demonstrate document control, by us viewing it online or looking at your various software applications. It can be from any source. So the way you look after entering a confined space may relate to a code of practice. So it may be that you adopt external documents as your procedure, and that's fine. These are the things that you'll need to think about from a documented information point of view. So a lot of flexibility. You determine what procedures are required. You determine what records you need to control, and you demonstrate that you're doing that. So again, I think it's a very good change in terms of providing that flexibility. In fact, the safety standard, the International Safety Standard 18001, in some respects, it always had that requirement, in that it put a requirement on you to eliminate or reduce the amount of documentation that you had as much as possible. So I guess we're heading in this way all along. So, change number 3, risk. Well, what is risk? I'll share a couple of different definitions, and then we'll look at the changes relating to the standards. So there's a few ways you can think about risk. One is around chance. Anyone has been to a casino or bet or had a bet, any type of bet, would be familiar with this type of approach. Not one used in business or safety that often. Then got the concept of external locus of control in terms of risk. I wouldn't advocate this type of approach either, which is really saying, well, it doesn't matter what we do. It's down to fate. It's down to the gods, and what will be will be. The concept that's much more used in traditional business, and this is a quote from Bernstein, is to define what may happen in the future and choose amongst the alternatives, which puts risk much more in our own hands. And often we use a process around consequence and likelihood in terms of appointing a chance of an outcome, and then thinking about the types of things we can implement to influence what the chance is, or to avoid a bad alternative from occurring. In quality, we introduce in fact, in all three of the standards, the concept of risk-based thinking. And in the notes around this standard, that they say, well, we've always had risk-based thinking, but it's been a lot more implicit. So through the requirements around planning and review and improvement, so things like preventative action. So risk-based thinking was always there. In some respects, the ISO are saying, well, we've simplified it now by creating a specific section around risk and being more explicit in terms of what the requirements are. So the main risk-based thinking permeates throughout the standard, but the most important section relates to section 6.1. It's about taking actions. So once you've identified what are relative risks and opportunities within the business, it's up to the business to determine what actions they're going to take in relation to them. And action could be avoiding, taking, eliminating, sharing, changing the likelihood and the consequence. Importantly, there's no requirement in 9001 for a formal methods for risk management or a documented risk management process. So you may start running around and using a 5x5 matrix and a risk register and all of these types of tools, if you think they add some value in terms of identifying and understanding risks and taking actions related to those risks. But 9001 isn't prescribing that you must do that. It's really a process which, again, I think is very intuitive to day-to-day business of considering risks and opportunities in terms of strategic decisions and being able to demonstrate that you've taken appropriate action in relation to them. I think for a small business, and being a small business owner myself, I think we're involved in risk-based thinking every day, and I'm sure senior managers are as well, in terms of considering key projects and how you're going to deliver those and avoid any of those unwelcome outcomes that you're trying to avoid on that journey. So it's very much aligned to contemporary thinking. And a good change in the standard, I think. There are some aspects that relate to 14001 and the safety standard around risk. So the next couple of slides focus on that. So again, so 6.1, just like in 9001. There is so the last slide I mentioned that in 9001 there isn't a requirement around having formal methods, but potentially there is in 14001. In that the organisation, so in 6.1.1 of 14001, it says the organisation shall maintain documented information of its risks and opportunities that need to be addressed. So if you've identified some risks that need to be addressed, then some degree of documented information, perhaps an aspect register is a common way we see it. It doesn't specify it needs to be in an aspect register, but somewhere there you need to have documented what those risks are that you've determined need to be addressed. And this one's a change. So 6.1.2 related to significant environmental aspects. It says the organisation shall maintain documented information of its criteria used to determine its significant environmental aspects. So previously, you needed to identify any significant environmental aspects. Moving forward, you're going to need to be able to spell out how you determined that something was significant or potentially not significant. So that may be through a risk matrix or maybe a workshop. It doesn't specify how you do it, but you'll need to be able to explain how you've arrived at a rating. So, safety. So 45,001. So this is exciting. It's not published yet. So in September 2016, if ISO roll it out when they say they're going to roll it out, we'll have an ISO standard for safety for the very first time. 18,001 will disappear, and ISO 45,001 will be born. There's no word on 4801 at this stage, but when you consider that the most up-to-date version of 4801 is the 2001 version, I think it sends a reasonable indication that Standards Australia will promote this new ISO standard. Some of the changes that relate to risk for 5001, and again, I wouldn't rush out and necessarily make some changes yourself, but because it's still in draft, and we may end up with some changes taking place this year before the final version's released. I think one of the negative aspects is this is 5.2. It relates to the policy. Well, negative in that we're seeing with the new versions of the standard that they're reducing the amount of mandatory requirements around documented information. So this 5.2 relates to the policy. So they've actually included a new requirement that must be included in the policy, which is a commitment to the control of OHSMS risks through a hierarchy of control and appropriate to the nature of its OHS risks and opportunities. So they've introduced a new requirement, which they haven't done in quality and environment, in terms of some wording around the policy. In 6.1.1, so similar to environment and quality, that from a safety point of view, you'll need documented information to the extent necessary to have confidence that processes are carried out as planned. Well, I guess it's up to you and us to interpret that. But basically, you need to make some decisions as to what documented information is required to effectively implement and carry out your business. And 6.1.2, it says that hazard identification and assessment of OHSMS risks require processes. So not a lot different there. They don't say you need to have documented information or a documented process, but we do need to see that processes are in place. They're the key changes relating to risk. So, preventative action is dead. Long live risk-based thinking. So there are no requirements around preventative action anymore, which I think is very positive. It's probably been one of the least understood parts of the standard by people implementing the system and, dare I say, people auditing the system. So I think the introduction of risk-based thinking into the standard and the elimination of preventative action makes for a very positive change. Okay, so transition. So when do they come in? What do they mean? What do you need to do? Okay, well, they were published, so they've been out for a while. At least when I say, 9001 and 14001 were both published September 2015. Live and kicking. 45,001, the safety standard is due to be published in September 2016. So we'll see. But there are draft versions available. The process involves, it's a 3-step process. So whether you're talking about certification or just ensuring your system is compliant, it's around competence of folk in terms of understanding what are the changes and what's required, undertaking some degree of gap analysis between your system today and the new versions of the standard, and then implementing those system changes. For the most part, I'm not anticipating many of our clients or the systems that I've been involved with there being many profound changes at all, which is a good news. And I think the new versions of the standard create opportunities for you to really align your management system with the business and its core processes. But nevertheless, these are the processes to think about in terms of the new versions of the standards. For those that are certified, you've got full 3 years to transition. So we've got from the 2008 version for 9,000, but for each of those. So people can still be certified to the previous versions today. So if someone knocked on our door and said, I'd like to be certified to the 2008 version of 9001, we have an obligation to recommend that they consider 2015, but at the end of the day, people can remain certified to the current versions right through to September 2018. Any certificates that are issued now for the 2008 version will have an expiry of September 2015. So even if the 3-year period that you're certified to ends, and we've got a couple of clients in this regard that were recertified in November 2015. Well, at the moment their expiry says September 2015. The key there is, well, there's no hurry. So I don't think there are any penalties or prizes for being the first or last, or doing it in 2016 or 2017 or 2018. I don't think you'll be penalised from business opportunities, nor will you necessarily aid you in getting more work because you went early. But I don't know. I mean, I can't speak for all of the procurement managers out there and how they assess these things. So how is it done? We do, so if you are certified, it can be done as a special audit. It can be done at the same time as your next scheduled surveillance, or the one after that, or the one after that. Or you may want to leave it till recertification. So it can't replace a surveillance. So if you're due for a surveillance audit in August or September, it can be done at the same time, but a little bit of extra time. We still need to do the full surveillance, and then we can undertake and spend a little bit of time looking at the transition as well. Or perhaps you like to do a bit of a gap audit at that surveillance and give yourself plenty of time to address any of the issues. So my message to people is relax. So in fact, right now, today in January, despite the standards being published September last year, Compass or anyone else are not in a position to roll out new certificates, and because we're still waiting for JASANS to give us the go-ahead to do so. So you've got plenty of time, but I think 2016 is a great year to start getting your head around what are the changes and what do they mean for your business. We'd encourage you to talk with your auditor or the management here of Compass, or your consultant if you use one. And we've got some pretty good tools. We've got some self-assessment checklists and some other things that I'm going to show you at the conclusion of the presentation, how you can download those. So that finishes the presentation. I'm going to show you on our website right now how you can access those checklists if you want to download them. And if anyone wants to type any questions, I'll answer those as we go along. So let me find our website. So hopefully you can see that there. It's compassassurance.com.au. If you click on the standard and the one that you're interested in, you can see I'm on 9001 at the moment. And you arrow to the bottom here. Lots of good information. Down here we've got an ISO 9001 self-assessment checklist. So we have one for the current version of the standard and for the 2015. So you're very welcome to download that. And equally, if I go to environment and safety, you'll be able to get a copy of those as well. So, thank you everyone. I hope you got some good information out of today's session. It was within 45 minutes. It's very difficult to provide a very detailed change, but as I said, I think the keys around leadership, risk-based thinking, and documented information. I think for the first time we have a version of the standard that is business contemporary, without losing the key, foundation around continual improvement and process approach. And I think it's going to really aid in the whole process of quality management systems and environmental management systems being relevant for industry moving forward. So that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much, and I look forward to spending time with you all over 2016 and hopefully helping if I can. If you've got any questions, please email us on info@compassassurance.com.au, and or you can give us a call. Thanks a lot.